welcome to my channel. I'm Steve Down. This is my guitar. If you've just joined us, this is the 6th episode in a study on My Favourite Things by Kenny Burrell. Sorry, there's been a bit of a gap between the last lesson and this lesson. Generally, I try to get a lesson out each week. It's not always possible, but generally, at least, you know, there's one lesson every 2 weeks. And the last 2 weeks, I haven't had a lesson on here because I've had to replace my laptop and my audio interface because it got stolen from a bag at a gig. Actually stolen from behind me on the stage. Normally I keep a bag on my stage, which an old seasoned musician told me when I was a teenager, to always keep my bag on the stage and never leave it in the green room, just in case stuff got stolen. Never accounted for the fact that it might get stolen on stage. So that's been fairly stressful, changing keys and car locks and all sorts, but we're now back on it. So thanks for your patience, especially those of you over on the Patreon page. So yeah, this week this is episode 6, and we're continuing with the solo. There's going to be one more lesson on this solo. This week we look at Kenny's stamina, the use of repetition, his use of that lick again. And we're also going to look at some useful tips on how to make your rhythm a bit more interesting by using different subdivisions. So before we jump in, just want to say a big thank you to my patrons. Just going to grab my phone. So loads of you have signed up despite the fact that there hasn't been a lesson for the last 2 weeks. So big thanks to David, Bruce, Woot, I think that's the correct pronunciation of your name. Let me know if not though. Craig, Jonathan, and recently Magnus from Sweden. So yeah, big thanks to you guys for signing on to the Patreon channel and for supporting me. If you want to support me, then Patreon is the best place to go to do that. And over there you'll get the backing track I created myself for this tune, and you'll also get the full transcription of the solo along with any exercises, scales, arpeggios, etc. that I put on screen on here. There is sometimes some extra stuff on there as well, and I'm now also doing a once a month Q&A. So stay tuned for the date for the September one. If you want to support just in a one-off fashion, then there's a Buy Me a Coffee link below. And just hit the subscribe button and the like button if you don't want to do any kind of subscription-based thing, as I know there's lots of those things around at the moment. So just subscribe and like and drop me a comment if you've got any questions below. So without further ado, let's just get on to looking at the solo. So here's the first 4 bars of it. So this particular phrase comes off the back of the last section of the solo, the last portion of the solo. So it starts actually on the last bar of the last 8 section. Obviously, Kenny wasn't really thinking like that. The solo isn't actually like that, but it's just that's the way that I've split it up. But yeah, the last bar of the last section, that's where the phrase starts. And it's a 4-note phrase, and he's playing it with a triplet rhythm. Which obviously any of you mathematicians out there will know that 4 doesn't really go into 3 and neither 3 into 4. So we get what's called this kind of timing displacement, or rhythmic displacement it's sometimes called. And that's basically where you have a triplet rhythm, which is solid throughout the entire bar. And your phrase is more than 3 notes. So what you end up with is the resolution being in a different place. Obviously, if your phrase was 3 notes, then you would phrase back onto the first note of that. It would resolve in the first beat of the next bar. So if your phrase was this, okay, then if you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, so there it's resolved back onto beat 1 in the next bar. Whereas if your phrase is 4 notes and you're using strict triplets like Kenny's doing here, then it'll sound like this. So it'll take 2 complete bars to resolve back onto the 1 again and start the thing again. Obviously, you can make sure that a 4-note phrase falls back onto beat 1 in the next bar, but you would have to make sure you're not using strict triplets. So you could use a triplet followed by a crotchet. And there's beat 1 of the next bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So that's an example of how you could phrase 4 notes using a triplet rhythm for some of it and still land back on beat 1. What Kenny does is he actually makes it even more complicated. He doesn't actually start on beat 1. He starts on the 3rd triplet of the first beat. So that will sound like this. So obviously it takes multiple bars to resolve back onto beat 1, and Kenny actually jumps off of it after about 3 bars. You don't need to follow it through to its natural conclusion. You can jump off of it just like he does. Okay, so he jumps off of it, and you've got the note of G there, and one of them is ever so slightly bent, showing his influence of rock music at the time, bringing that kind of string bending into jazz, slightly ahead of fusion. And it's always good with stuff like these repetitive timing displacement patterns, it's always good to have a gigantic payoff at the end, and that's what Kenny does. You can see he's got a double stop in the next bar, the first bar of the next 4-bar phrase. And so he slides into that, playing really hard, okay, slightly overdriving the clean channel on there, and the notes that we've got there are D and B. Okay, so following on from that, let's look on to the next 4 bars. So for the rest of this phrase here, it's all pentatonic and blues scale. There's nothing massively interesting here, that I haven't covered in previous episodes, other than the fact that, again, we've got that lick, the lick that he uses there again. Okay, now here you could use hammer-ons and pull-offs or slides to execute the legato. I think it's so fast that I don't think it necessarily matters which one you use. It sounds the same with both of them. Just remember that if you're going to use a slide, then you can use your 3rd finger for it. And if you're going to use hammer-ons and pull-offs, you might want to make sure you start on your 2nd finger, because your 3rd finger is going to be slightly stronger for executing that hammer-on and pull-off. So make sure that as you're coming down the previous bar, you're making sure that on the 14th fret you're using your 2nd finger for that rather than your 3rd. Phrasing wise on here, same stuff that I covered in the last episode, in the fact that he's making the pentatonic scale interesting in the fact that he's adding in extra subdivisions like those triplet semiquavers there, and he's also changing the direction of the pentatonic scale as he's going down. So going down to go back up again, and then down again, and then going back up again, and this is to connect to the next bar. So let's look at the next 4 bars. Now the next 4 bars are really interesting because he's using a variety of different subdivisions. And subdivisions are basically the lengths of your notes, how you're dividing up the bar. So here are all of the subdivisions that are the basic ones. I haven't started with a whole note. The whole note is the one that is basically takes up the whole bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. But then I go into minims, then crotchets, quavers, triplet quavers, semiquavers, and then sextuplets, which is 2 groups of semiquaver triplets put together. It's useful to make sure that you know how to execute all of those subdivisions and you know how they sound aurally, as well as being able to play them on the guitar, so that you can hear a melody using those subdivisions. The more you practice them and get used to them, the more likely you are to start using them naturally in your own improvisation. So here Kenny starts on the and of beat 1. And in the next bar, he basically subtracts notes out of the bar. And the good thing about this is it does add a little bit of tension in there. And you've got that resolution onto the A. Okay, it's a really nice, lovely resolution onto there, and the tension has come from the fact they subtracted notes out of the bar. So moving on from the subdivisions that I just showed you, now we're going to subtract notes from those subdivisions. So we're going to make them into rests. Okay, so here is an exercise where the first bar is subtracting notes from a rhythm that is basically quavers, and then the second one, it'll be subtracting notes from a rhythm that is triplet quavers, and then the same for semiquavers, and then finally finishing off the bar just with a whole note on the note of E. Now, you probably wouldn't play exactly like this, that particular 3-4 bar phrase there, but it's a good exercise to be able to train you to be able to take away to be able to take away notes. But it's a good exercise for you to train yourself in being able to take away notes from the bar in order to create space, to create tension, and then to resolve back onto the one, giving your listener, a nice climax to the melody that you're trying to create. Let's look at the last 4 bars of this section of the solo. So in these last 4 bars, he starts off with a lovely slide using double stop. Again, look at the last episode where I look at all of the double stops using fourths on the top 2 strings, as it's well worth making sure you know those because they're quite bluesy and are used by a plethora of jazz and blues guitarists. But yeah, moving on from that, we got that lick again, changing direction in the pentatonic scale. And then at the end, something interesting. We've got a hexatonic minor scale that's being used. A hexatonic scale is basically where you've got a 6-note scale. So the blues scale is a hexatonic scale. Here it's a hexatonic minor scale, which is basically a minor pentatonic scale with an added natural second. So we're adding in the F sharp in this case here. So this is a hexatonic minor scale. And people in modern day rock use this. People like David Gilmour use the hexatonic minor because use adding in those extra notes on there taken from the natural minor scale, and then also using the natural minor pentatonic. It's a really good addition to the minor pentatonic without having to switch immediately to a new scale. And also, just knowing that you can add in extra notes to your minor pentatonic without having to think in a completely different ballpark, it makes it easier when you're playing and you're trying to think of a melody, or you're trying to have some kind of creative freedom going along with your melody that you're creating in your solo. So all you got to do is think minor pentatonic and then add in one extra note. In here, it's the F sharp, taken from the natural minor scale. So, okay, and that's really nice at the top there. So try that in your own playing. Okay, thanks for watching along. If you got this far, I think the biggest takeaways from here are making sure that you know your subdivisions and you know how to subtract notes from those subdivisions to make some interesting tense rhythms that you will then resolve, giving a climax for the listener. And then I think the other thing as well is, adding in interesting notes like the hexatonic minor at the end there. Kenny wouldn't have been thinking, oh, I'm going to use the hexatonic minor now. He would have basically just been thinking, I'm going to add an extra note to the minor pentatonic scale and solo with that. And since then, we've called it the hexatonic minor. As I always say to a lot of my students, music theory wasn't invented. It was pretty much just discovered. We just discovered the patterns. So it's better to think of it like that, because then you're going to be able to kind of put yourself in more of a position to have more creative freedom and not have to worry too much about rules and regs. So happy practicing this week. I will see you next week for another look at the rest of the solo. So make sure that you go over to Patreon if you want to grab the backing track and the full transcription and all of the exercises that I've put on here, and also join in on the Q&A, which would be midway through September, I would have thought. So, but I'll announce the date on that one soon. So thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. See you soon. Bye.